Assalamu alaikum everyone. This is your host Maryam Khan and welcome to another episode of the Info Corridor Talk. Ladies and gentlemen, Pakistan has a long and illustrious history of friendly relations, mutual support and beneficial cooperation with African friends and partners. Historically, Pakistan has played its role in lending support to African freedom struggles from colonial rule, combating apartheid, extending humanitarian assistance where needed, and supporting building capacity through training programs and initiatives. Pakistan is also proud of its contribution to peace and security in Africa since 1960s. Under the US auspices, Pakistani Blue Helmets, including women peacekeepers, continue to play their part in peacekeeping and peace building efforts across the continent. In line with the Prime Minister Imran Khan's foreign policy vision, Pakistan has embarked upon a new path-breaking Engage Africa initiative toward the African continent by strengthening political and diplomatic linkages, further deepening and broadening mutually beneficial trade and economic ties, and expanding cultural and people-to-people exchanges. Foreign Minister Maktoum Shah Mahmood Qureshi is spearheading the realization of this initiative. As part of this initiative, Pakistan's diplomatic outreach and presence in Africa is being significantly enhanced. To talk on underlying causes and prospects of Engage Africa initiative, we are privileged to have with us Dr. Professor Najimuddin Bakare. Dr. Bakare is head of department in Center of International Peace and Stability at National University of Science and Technology. So, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Ms. Maryam. Thank you for welcoming me on the program.
So, can you please elaborate what Engage Africa initiative actually is and what motivated Pakistan to spearhead it?
Thank you so much for that question. I think we should begin to look at the historical background between the relationship between Pakistan and Africa, as you have quite articulate very well, that since the dawn of the new century, that means the end of the Second World War, with the birth of Pakistan in 1947 and subsequent emancipation of African countries, there have been a kind of historical, ideological connection between Pakistan and the African continent, so to say. And this connection kind of explain the philosophy, the geostrategic philosophy that brings Pakistan, which is far away in Asia, with African continent. Hence, the whole process of decolonization was very important in the history of relations between Africa and Pakistan. Like you have mentioned, subsequently, by 1960, when Pakistan firstly launched its military peacekeepers into Africa, particularly in Congo. So if you put all of these historical perspective, you put them in context, one can understand why it is not just a novel idea that Pakistan will be relating with the African continent. However, we have not been able to achieve a very formidable and pragmatic policy towards the African continent. In my very humble opinion, I think much of Pakistan international relations have been quite Euro-America centric, or perhaps I would say Africa have been at the back burner in terms of Pakistan foreign relationship. But this realization that Africa is having though we have a small population, or about 11% of the global population is in Africa. However, there's a growing tendency and realization that Africa, despite the fact that we have huge resources, enormous resources, there is a realization that this continent might sometime in its history, become a very powerful continent. And hence, it is very worthy for Pakistan to join the bandwagon of those who will be relating with Africa. Perhaps let us look at Gawada, for example, which is in the very close to the Arab Sea. Now, this Arab Sea connects to the Indian Ocean, with the larger Indian Ocean, and the larger Indian Ocean connects with the African Indian Ocean, and all through. So there is somehow maritime connection between Pakistan and Africa, military defense cooperation between Pakistan and Africa, economic relation. But like I said, based on your question, there is a realization that Pakistan must start looking towards Africa, just as the rest of other countries or important nations are trying to understand the importance of the African continent. And let's say if China is having an inward penetration into Africa, Pakistan has been a very great friend of China for quite some time. So that could be a way for China, for Pakistan itself to get into Africa. And luckily enough, the Prime Minister Imran Khan government has also come to this realization that we need to move away from our cultural differences or cultural barrier, the gulf, in my own understanding, that have deprived Pakistan for quite numbers of years not to move close to certain African countries. And of course, this is having a huge ramification and within the country. Take, for example, in our curriculum, what they teach, how we teach, and what we teach of African in Pakistan. What do we know of Africa? Less than those countries where Pakistan play cricket with. Take, for example, Namibia, South Africa, Kenya. These are the few countries, most Pakistani youth will know of. Other than that, we talk of the kind of information we get from the BBC as such. So, I think there's a less or meager unknown territory. Africa is a known territory in Pakistan, whether even among the academia. So it is in the right direction that the Prime Minister and his government have come to that realization that we need to launch what they call the Africa Initiative.
Sir, what are some of the concrete steps that have been so far been taken by Pakistan as well as the African nations in furtherance this initiative?
I think the very first was when the foreign ministry brought together the ambassadors that are representing Africa here in Pakistan, particularly in Islamabad. That was the very first initiative. So bringing them together, discussing an in-depth understanding, trying to see what is lacking, what is the gulf of understanding or misunderstanding between the continent of Africa and Pakistan. So that was the first. Then the second step was having a kind of a conference where things were actually debated and discussed. And I think it was a very good step in the right direction, where there was a conference, particularly on Africa. And number three was the involvement of the chambers of commerce. I think this has been the nascent or very embryonic step taken by this government. But as we know, that sometimes we might have initiative, but the propensity to push that initiative to a logical conclusion is always missing. So we look forward to seeing what this government will be pursuing at the end of the day, particularly as you asked about the concrete steps that have been taken. So let's see in a couple of years to come, maybe small concrete steps will be taken. But as much as I know is that the first step was this having, can you hear me, Ms. Maryam?
Yes, sir, I can.
Okay, that the very first step was that of the meeting with the ambassadors, which was then followed by the conference on Africa. I think these are more, and aside from that, the Pakistan government is also trying to improve its trade relations with a lot of African countries. particularly with Kenya, those in eastern part of Africa. One thing we should be looking at, I think, is the distance. But in the globalized world, we have come to say that globalization have contracted our geographical differences. Maybe what have deprived Pakistan from actually penetrating or having a very in-depth relations with African continent is that distance. But that distance is not much because Pakistan is very much close to the Horn of Africa and to the east of Africa. Other than that, it is just a pragmatic step, which I think the present government have taken a very concrete step, ambassadorial meeting, followed by a conference. Other than that, I don't think nothing else has been done. Maybe these are in the making, particularly within the foreign affairs, that something is in the making, and we're yet to see how Pakistan will push forward its Africa initiative years to come.
So, what are the immediate short-term and long-term both the sides have pledged to achieve under this grand engagement project?
Okay, let's begin with the short term. In the short term, I think we can boost our economic relations, both in long term and short term. Economic relations can be boosted. We can also boost our military diplomatic relations as well. And for the very fact that Pakistan has been suffering from certain kind of illness, which is also peculiar in certain African countries. So there could be cooperation in that sense. Number three, both short-term and long-term, we can also cooperate on this peacekeeping, which is one of the fundamental part of Pakistan foreign policy towards African continent. So again, that could be one good relations. Pakistan is having a very formidable or worthwhile engineering, construction company here that can also have their own place of facilitate benefit the African continent. Now, we look at SDG as one of the initiatives of the United Nations. Pakistan and Africa can always participate cooperate on this in terms of certain aspects of the SDG. For example, we can both collaborate on how do we end poverty, how do we end hunger, how do we end inequality. So there can be achieved between these two countries at both short and the long term. Now, at the very long time purpose, now we look at BRI, or I'm not looking at CPEC now, but I'm looking at BRI at the very larger picture. So Pakistan is having its own CPEC, which is connected with India, and few African countries, take for example, like Djibouti, like Kenya, Egypt, and Ethiopia, and Tanzania, which are very much effective and important in the BRI project. They're also having their own relation. So this is one way. And all of these countries I have mentioned are not that far or distant from Pakistan. So Pakistan will not only be benefiting from its own CPEC, it will also be benefiting from these Horn of Africa and East of African countries vis-a-vis the so-called BRI. And beyond that, there is huge opportunity for Pakistan to also benefit. This is in the long time, that BRI will not also, CPEC will not only be benefiting Pakistan vis-a-vis CPEC, vis-a-vis BRI, but with CPEC and BRI, Pakistan can always have a huge or deeper penetration into Africa on the platform of China. So this can be a kind of bandwagoning that Pakistan will be getting to know more African more through the Chinese bandwagoning.
So what are the challenges or impediments in realization of this initiative?
I think that's a very critical question, that what are the impediments or the barriers that could hamper this initiative. Number one, we have to remove the cultural misunderstanding between the two parties. One, Pakistan. To what extent does the Pakistani society understand Africa beyond a racial and cultural perspective? Oh, color. So that sense. So beyond that, we have to move beyond that. One. Number two, if we have to have African initiative, the academia in Pakistan must play a very vital role. Like I said, we only have in Qaeda-e-Azam University, where you have the Center for North America and African Studies. I wonder if there's any African studies there. So if you look at the Pakistani university, the academia itself, there is little on name, which is known about the African continent, one. Number two, let us look at the curriculum at the primary school, the secondary school, or even at the university level. Which of the university teaches African subject or something that is related to even foreign policy of African countries? None. We're only being bothered by US-Pakistan relation, US-Afghan relations, even less of Latin America. So that if we don't even know of Latin America, I can tell you that maybe Pakistan relation with Latin America might only be confined to Brazil, Argentina, Peru, and Chile. Less of, and we have a huge number of countries in South America or in Latin America. This is also true for the African continent. So the academia, they have huge amount of work to do, responsibility, in order to see we do not have cooperation in terms of the intellectuals in Africa and intellectuals in Pakistan. Nothing is happening. And you cannot move forward with such a wonderful African initiative without the collaboration and deep cooperation of the intellectuals, one. Number two, the role of the media. If the media is not projecting Africa beyond what the BBC or CNN project of Africa. Now, Africa is beyond the poverty. Africa is beyond disease. Africa is beyond the rural areas they only show to people on TVs. You go to Africa, in some part of African country, you think you are in Europe and you wonder, is this truly Africa? So again, the media needs to play its role. There's a huge role for the media to play. Number three is the chambers of commerce, people-to-people contact. You see, the European Union wasn't just, the creation of the European Union wasn't just a political entity. It was also based on the idea of functionalism. And this functionalism was created or predicated on the idea of people-to-people contact. That functional, when people-to-people contact becomes functional and entrenched, this would trigger political sensitization or political understanding between the states. So if huge amount of people are having relationship between India and Pakistan, this might ameliorate the political wrangling between India and Pakistan. And this is also true for African and Pakistan. If there's a huge people-to-people contact without any discrimination, this can actually happen. Like I said earlier, Pakistan must move beyond the racial and cultural lens of viewing Africa for you to do that. If the Indians be having good economic, political, and diplomatic relations with Africa, the Koreans, the Chinese, the Turks. So what about Pakistan? So we have to move. I do know one of the challenges of Pakistan is that Pakistan has its own challenges vis-a-vis economy, vis-a-vis its own political issues, and so many other things. But nevertheless, with this initiative, these are things I believe could affect or become impediment. Number four. Now, ever before Imran Khan came to power, the question is, what about the previous government? For example, the PP or the PML. So there was no realization of Africa with this government administration. So if the Imran Khan government, the PTI government, is succeeded by another government, do we know if this initiative will continue? So in public policy analysis, there's what we call incremental policy making. Now, would there be an incremental positioning of Pakistan with Africa? Maybe the next administration might debunk the old notion of Africa. You know, this African continent, it doesn't matter. It doesn't bring anything good to Pakistan. Pakistan have nothing. Take, for example, a country like Nigeria that is having huge oil. So, and Pakistan is starving of oil. So we can have, the distance does not actually matter, my dear. For example, if Pakistan could be having a huge relations with US. Yes, US is a superpower, that is understood, but look at the distance between United States and Pakistan. Yet Pakistan is having its own relations. And so if Pakistan could have that with United States, regardless of the distance, same could be true for so many countries in Africa. So one is the academia, number two, the media, number three, the business community, the chambers of commerce, they have to play their roles. And four is the change in government that could actually affect these, what I call incremental policymaking. And lastly, in my opinion, is the fact that Pakistan should try to relax its administrative bottlenecks for those Africans that might be happy to explore. Now, take for example, many years back, the Tablighi movement, which is a missionary organization, has been one of the decks or the front line that's been promoting Pakistan in Africa. So you go to any African country, you will find the Tablighi Jama over there, projecting Pakistan. Oh, Pakistan, Pakistan. So a lot of people get to know Pakistan through the Tablighi. So one might be surprised. How can Tabligh be the ambassador, the diplomat of Pakistan? So even religious movement. So what I'm trying to say is that you can actually project yourself through a lot of instruments. Foreign policy has what we call the foreign policy tools. So within this toolbox, you can use any of your tools. So the Tablighi Jama could be one of your tools. Another example I can give, for example, in my own country, is the Ahmadiyya, that we have Ahmadiyya hospitals. So though I'm not concerned about the ideological aspect of the Ahmadiyya, but for example, the Ahmadiyya, which was rendering social and welfare services to the people over there, it was not just projecting the Ahmadiyya, but it was projecting Pakistan. So, because you get to know Pakistan through the Ahmadiyya, and we get to know Pakistan more through the Tablighi. So there's a lot of way, and this is why I say that Pakistan have to reduce or relax its administrative bottleneck for people who intends to travel and explore Pakistan. Though again, I have to give kudos to the Imran government that they have done a lot to facilitate this in terms of the swift visa processing, whether it is or what do you call it, entry port, visa facilitation, or some other facilitation. So the government is doing its best, but still more has to be done.
So as you've mentioned earlier about the CPEC, so what do you think, what role can CPEC play in this entire program?
I think, to be honest, you know, that CPEC is more or less bilateral, which by extension metamorphose or could metamorphose into a multilateral project. It is between Pakistan and China. But the vision of CPEC, it is to become multilateral, such that the tentacles of CPEC will spread beyond Pakistan, would get to Central Asia, would get to Europe. That's the aim. But in the same way, like I said, if Gawada ports, if Balochistan or Gawada particularly is one of the nerves, the core, one of the core of CPEC. And like I said earlier, CPEC, Gawada is located along the Arabian Sea, which is connected to the larger Indian Ocean or the African Ocean. So there is a way Pakistan trade can move beyond just the Karachi port or the Qasim port through what do you call it, through the Gawada port. So Pakistan can actually use the CPEC opportunity to navigate into many African countries in one of the consequences or the ramification of CPEC. As earlier said, maybe distance might be some impediment, a kind of impediment for Pakistan, but that might not be true for the countries that have some proximity with Pakistan. Take, for example, the countries I've mentioned earlier, the East of Africa and the Horn of Africa. Take a very good example, how Pakistan was very instrumental in salvaging the American soldiers that were ambushed or trapped in Somalia. If not for the heroic bravery of the Pakistani soldiers that went to emancipate the Americans, I think we'll be talking something different today. So what I'm trying to say, that look at the role of Pakistani military peacekeepers in places like Somalia. So if Pakistani military or peacekeepers could have the propensity to travel all across the globe to projecting the foreign policy of Pakistan through peacekeeping, why CPEC cannot do the same? So CPEC would evidently bring about a good relation between Pakistan and the African continent through the sea. So there could be a huge maritime cooperation. And again, that can also show the strength of Pakistan in terms of maritime security. So if Pakistan would be trading with these African countries, then Pakistan must also protect its trade, its commerce that is passing through the Indian or the African Ocean in terms of fighting against the pirate. Now, what the Chinese are doing, the Chinese has a base in Djibouti, which is very strategic in terms of protecting the Chinese sea trade. That can also be true. And that, of course, would further cement the relationship, Sino-Pakistani relationship, that it is not just confined to the Asian continent, but it also extends to the African continent in terms of maritime security. So maritime security is very important vis-a-vis CPEC and vis-a-vis Africa, because we might not be talking about CPEC, which is moving towards the Central Asia or Afghanistan or Europe, but we might be talking about CPEC, which is connected to the African or Indian Ocean, and which, of course, Pakistan one way or the other would be concerned. You take, for example, if there's any goods, huge tons of tankers coming from Africa, let's say with oil, from Algeria or from Mozambique or Angola or from Nigeria, bringing oil to Pakistan. And it's going to bring the oil to the Gawada port. Why should Pakistan not be concerned about these tankers? So that's one way of looking at it, how CPEC can actually facilitate and extend the importance of Africa to Pakistan particularly in terms of maritime security.
So what are your recommendations to strengthen the Pakistan-African socio-economic partnership?
I think I've said this numbers of times. What are ways or recommendations? The first recommendation is that there should be incremental policy making in Pakistan vis-a-vis Pakistan-African relations. This should not just be confined or limited to the American government. We don't know if the government luckily comes back after the 5 years, so maybe they might continue with that policy. But if, God willing, any other government comes in, would they be doing that? So the first recommendation, or my humble suggestion, is that there should be an incremental understanding of why this policy must be pushed forward. I'll give you a very good example or analogy. In 1992, India came up with this idea, look east policy. When Modi government came to power, they changed the old slogan from look east to what? Act east. Look at, it's a huge lift. It's a huge leap from looking and acting. So in the same way, maybe at present, Pakistan is just looking at Africa, but not acting. So my recommendation is that rather than just looking, Pakistan should be acting towards Africa pragmatically, not just on paper, but doing things that can actually benefit Africa as a continent and Pakistan as a country, one. Number two, we have universities where we say modern languages. Do we find any language of Africa being taught in these modern languages? So, for example, Swahili. Swahili is one of the most popular African languages, which is spoken in East Africa and beyond that. It's a very popular, huge language, which is a combination of Arabic and the local African language. We can start studying Swahili at normal in these African. So one is that. Number two, like I said earlier, the role of the academia is very important as one of my recommendations. I believe for change to be effected, for anything to come to bear, we need the academia to play a good role. Conferences, I'm not talking of just conferences or seminars where you go at the end of the day, have some snacks or huge, lavish lunch. No, I'm talking of something that could be productive. Exchange of ideas, collaborations between African intellectuals and Pakistani intellectuals. Two. Number three, the role of the media, my recommendation. How much is the media in Pakistan projecting Africa, trying to understand Africa from a Pakistani sense, not from a Western sense, So that means decolonization of Pakistani media. In the same way, we have to decolonize the Pakistani academia, because so many Pakistani academia are also still embedded and buried in that colonial sentiment of looking at Africa. And this, if we don't do, I think will not be moving forward. Africa initiative will only be a paperwork. And I think the military is not doing that. The military has been forthcoming quite much more than so many other institutions in terms of the readiness of the military to go beyond even their own capacity. I wrote a paper on peacekeeping, Pakistan peacekeeping, its diplomacy as a diplomatic tools towards Africa, that despite the issues Pakistan is facing in its own boundaries, move to participate in peacekeeping all over the world. I think one should give kudos to Pakistan military in this regard. And lastly, my own recommendation is the role of people-to-people contact. There should be more people-to-people contact. If this should happen, this would actually bring integration and formidable cooperation among the states of Africa and countries like Pakistan. But that would only happen if we decolonize our thinking about the African continent.
Sir, thank you so very much for joining us. And dear audience, thanks for watching our show. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel and visit our website and social media accounts to remain updated on issues of strategic significance.
Thank you so much, Ms. Maryam.
Thank you, sir.